We'll get started. Erin and I are very happy to be chairing this session on international research. She'll be helping with discussion. Looking at different topics. The first paper by Dasom Jang, who's finished her second-year PhD student at Michigan State University. Focuses not so much on a policy, but more on gender psychological basis, and we'll talk about this. The presentation will be done by Duanyi. Will be starting at Cornell ILR School in the fall. The paper uses German data to examine the effects of working from home on worker well-being. And the third paper, Kramer will present, who's an assistant professor at the Department of Human Development and Family Studies. And she will present that paper, which uses data from multiple countries, Australia, Germany, and South Korea, to examine the effect of parental leave on the wife's return to work and life satisfaction of the couple. So I will present the papers, or I will use my share screen to control the slides. The authors will indicate when to change the slides. This session is being recorded, like all the sessions in Lyra, and then will be saved to the clouds for future viewing. You can use questions. If you want to ask questions, we will address them after all three paper presenters have finished. You can use the raise hand function or type in the chat function your questions, and then we will address them after everyone is finished. We have three papers in this session, and I've asked the authors to do about 12 minutes per session. I'll control the time and indicate to the authors when the 12 minutes are up. So I'll start sharing my screen, and Dasom will begin doing her paper.
Okay.
Okay. Oops. I want to stop that. Let me do this again.
It's okay.
Can you see that, Dasom?
Yeah, I can see that.
Okay.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm Dasom Jang, and this presentation is prepared with Dr. Berg and entitled as Explaining Gender Wage Difference with Gender Role Orientation and Labor Market Segmentation Framework, and we're focusing on the mediation of job characteristics. Next slide, please.
Yep.
Okay. So the purpose of this paper is to use individual gender ideology as a psychological predictor to explain gender wage difference. And we use the construct gender role orientation, which is defined as the beliefs that individuals hold about traditional roles for men and women at work and at home, respectively. So it's an operationalization of how strongly individuals align themselves with traditional gender ideology. And we use two theoretical backgrounds, role congruity theory and labor market segmentation theory. So we're using these theories to explain how gender role orientation affects gender wage differences through mediation of three types of job characteristics: skill and ability, agentic, and communal job characteristics. So the overarching research question we're asking here is, through which mechanism does the gender role orientation impact labor market outcomes? And we're applying psychological predictor to labor market segmentation framework to explain gender wage differences. Next slide, please. So to briefly explain what gender role orientation and gender behavioral prescriptions are based upon, it's based on the gender role theory and social role theory, which argues that traditional perceptions of the division of labor identifies men with breadwinner roles and women with family caregiver roles. And egalitarian perceptions doesn't have any specific roles or domains assigned to each gender. And role congruity theory predicts that meeting this organizational gender role expectation is rewarding both socially and monetarily. So if men aligns themselves with agentic stereotypes, being independent, masterful, etc., they're more likely to be rewarded. And women, if they align themselves with more communal stereotypes, mostly being more interpersonal or nurturant, then they're more likely to be rewarded. And psychologists argue that these organizational expectations override the individual gender ideologies. And also failure to meet these stereotypes can result in unfavorable outcomes, especially for women, by losing opportunity to get promoted. Next slide, please. And there isn't evidence that labor market is segmented by gender, and gender role orientation is associated with that segmentation. So how strongly individuals align themselves with traditional gender ideology determines strategies individuals utilize to manage work and family life, basically their life. And this ultimately determines labor market outcomes of individuals. And studies have shown that traditional gender role orientation is associated with higher earnings, especially for men, and the effect was stronger when the occupation had fewer women. And findings from labor economists also suggest that prevalence of traditional gender ideology by state and deviation from traditional behavioral prescriptions for women are associated with relatively lower labor market outcomes, especially for women. Next slide, please. So before applying this GRO construct to labor market segmentation theory, I wanted to briefly explain what this labor market segmentation theory is. It argues that labor market in the United States is divided into discrete segments across which mobility is severely restricted by technological and social barriers. So it's about the mechanism, the reproduction mechanism of labor market segmentations, rather than predicting the higher wage one receives at a certain time period. So it argues that through positive feedback, which results in the reproduction of high versus low wage segregation, labor market is divided by primary and secondary labor market. So first one is characterized by high wages, high productivity, and stability, whereas and the opposite for the secondary labor market. And also they suggest a mechanism of this positive feedback through acquisition of higher skills, which are described below, that higher wage attracts higher skills, and then higher productivity resulting in wage increase over time, and the opposite for lower wage. Next slide, please. So we're applying this gender role orientation to the labor market segmentation framework, that the labor market, that skill and ability are, like mentioned in the previous slide, that could be the technological barriers, such that higher level of skill and ability provides positive feedback. And we're arguing that agentic and communal job characteristics are social barriers, such that consistency between gender and these expectations provides positive feedback, resulting in wage increase or decrease over time. Next slide, please. So these are the hypotheses. That first one is that agentic job characteristic mediates the relationship between GRO and wage for men. And hypothesis 2 argues that communal job characteristic does that for women. And third, skill and ability should mediate the relationships between GRO and wage for both men and women. Next slide, please. So the data we used is the US sample, but we were able to have access to the panel data. So since GRO is using National Longitudinal Survey of Youth 79, so in GRO variables, items were available in 79, 82, 87, 2004. We used these 4 time periods. And we also included the control variables, mostly the predictors of gender ideology. And we plugged in the ONIT database job characteristics, skill and ability, agentic and communal characteristics, and then matched them to the occupation code of the individuals. Next slide, please. Okay, the analytics strategy, before we go into the results, I just wanted to mention that we divided the data by sex, and then we used OLS to identify predictors of GRO by gender. And then we tested fixed and random effects model. And then we tested the mediation using autoregressive longitudinal mediation model. Using M+. Next slide, please. So this is the result of the OLS result. Controlling for the previous year's GRO lag, GRO, we can see that men and women share different predictors of their gender role orientation. But commonality is that being African-American and having higher self-esteem and having a full-time working mother predicted more egalitarian GRO. But like being married and education was only relatively significant for women, not for men. So yeah, next slide, please. And the fixed and random effect estimate shows that GRO predicts wage for women, not for men. So based on the fixed effect estimates, we can see that women with more egalitarian GRO earns 99 percentage point higher wage than women who has relatively traditional gender role orientation. Next slide, please. So before going into the mediation results, I wanted to briefly explain what autoregressive longitudinal mediation model does. So it focuses on the time-related relationship between the predictor and dependent variable through a mediator variable, and it allows controlling for lag effects of predictor, mediator, and dependent variable, and it allows predicting long-term effects. Next slide, please. So the results of the mediation model results, due to time constraint, I'm just gonna briefly explain the results. So first, skill and ability mediated the relationship between GRO and wage between 1987 and 2004 for women. To be more specific, more egalitarian GRO was associated with more income mediated through wage, skill and ability. And second, agentic job characteristic mediated the relationship between GRO and wage between 1987 and 2004 for men, not for women. To be more specific, more egalitarian GRO was associated with more income mediated through agentic job characteristics. However, I should note that the total and direct effect of GRO on wage was not statistically significant, only the indirect effect, the mediation, was significant. And lastly, communal characteristics did not mediate the relationship between GRO and wage for both men and women. Next slide, please. Yeah. To briefly interpret these outcomes, first of all, overall, the significant mediation suggests that organizational role did not override individual gender role orientation. This could be because gender differences could be imprinted in personality traits and behavioral tendencies that in the organizational role does not invalidate the gender differences individuals possess. And also it could be due to the gender role spillover mechanism where gender roles contaminate the organizational roles to cause people to have different expectations for men and women in workplace. And you can see the effect was only significant between 1987 and 2004, and we expected that this is due to the different life stages of the sample that considering the age range from 22 to 30 in 1987 and from 39 to 48 in 2004, they were definitely going through life stage shift, which could result in significant increase in their wage. Next slide, please. And also, the interesting part was that skill and ability mediated GRO and wage for women, not men. And the first reason we could find is that the labor market characteristic for women, that women have a higher return to skill and ability because women tend to be less skilled and more likely to be located at the lower paying industries and occupations. And the other reason could be the macroeconomic labor market trend or transition that between 1979 and 2007, 85% of decline in middle skilled jobs for female was offset by a rise in high skill occupations, whereas for men, the rise was only 55% and the remaining 45% remained in the service sector. And communal job characteristic did not mediate between GRO and wage, which regardless of the previous findings from psychologists expected that complying to expected communal stereotype in organization for women should be rewarding. It did not. And we're thinking this could be due to the fact that jobs with communal characteristics are under-rewarded in labor market if they are rewarded. And evidence also suggests that occupations lose pay if they have higher percentage of female workers or require nurturing skills. Yeah, so this is the end of my presentation. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you. Now we'll go on to Duanyi, who will present this paper on working from home and worker well-being, new evidence from Germany.
Great, thank you very much, Peter. So sorry, my camera doesn't work very well this morning, so I will keep my camera off during this presentation. Peter, I'll wait for you to have my slides.
Can you see that?
No.
It still is showing the previous presentation.
Oh.
You may need to stop sharing and restart sharing.
I guess I have to do that. Sorry. Yeah. Thank you. Sorry, Berg.
So we can start from the first slide.
There we go.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you, Peter.
All
So yeah, thank you for having me here. So I'm delighted to share one of my joint work with my colleague Erin, who is also here in this meeting, and two other colleagues, Laura and Lisa from Harvard School of Public Health. So our work investigates the relationship between working from home practices and worker well-being. Next slide. So the idea of working from home should not sound foreign to many of you during this global pandemic. So the statistics shows that about a third of American workers are working from home because of the coronavirus. So with millions of workers taking part in this work from home experiment, I think it is worthwhile for us to ask a question about how do workers themselves actually feel about working from home. Next slide. So although working from home has been promoted as a way to encourage work-family balances and to support workers' well-being, so actually the research evidence on this benefit is quite mixed and unclear in the broad work and family literature. So on one hand, as you can see on the top box, working from home means for those people with extensive domestic responsibilities can take care of some of the home responsibilities, such as supervising their older children or teens during the regular work days while they work from home. So in this way, we may view that working from home as an important workplace resources that could lead to a greater workers' greater control over when and where their work is done, which could in turn lower people's work-to-family conflict and improve workers' well-being. But on the other hand, work from home may, got so fast.
Yeah.
So on the other hand, work from home may also reinforce the professional workers' norm and lead to greater work intensification. So this practice may also involve the so-called role blurring because the physical barrier between people's personal space and their workspace are erased during when people work from home. So probably that is why there has been mixed empirical evidence on working from home's effect on workers' work-family conflict, as well as some other worker well-being outcomes. Next slide. So in order to reconcile these two different perspectives, what our research does is that we use a large linked employer-employee data survey from Germany to evaluate the impact of this increasingly common practices on work practice on people's well-being. So the employer survey covers a representative of private sector establishments with at least 50 employees in manufacturing and service industries. And our analytic samples covers around 900 establishments and around 6,100 workers. Next slide. So to operationalize the work from home practice, we distinguish between the working from home that occurs during regular work hours and working from home that occurs outside of those hours. So we call these two practices replacement work from home and additional work from home. So this operationalization could help us to move beyond the broader claims that working from home is either beneficial or as a new form of worker exploitation, to better specify different forms of remote work and their implications for workers and for organizations. Next slide. So we first investigate how both work from home practices are related to both total work hours and overtime hours as an indicator of work intensification. And then we model the relationship between each work from home practices and a variety of worker outcomes, such as work to family conflict, family to work conflict, job satisfaction, work engagement, and workers' psychological well-being. And finally, we also analyze whether the replacement and additional work from home practice could affect people's plan to leave their job, which is an outcome of interest to work organization because of the cost of recruiting and training new employees, as well as lost productivity when experienced workers leave their job. Okay, next slide. So specifically, we estimate multi-level OS models with respondents nested within within their establishment. So the key dependent variable is workers' work intensification and well-being outcomes, as I just described on the last slides. And the key independent variables is working from home categorical indicator. So in the model, we controls for region fixed effect, industry and year fixed effect, as well as a group of individual and firm level characteristics that might be correlated with those outcomes, such as people's gender, age, education, as well as some firm level characteristics, such as firm size and whether the firm has works councils or covered by collective bargaining agreements. Next slide. And in addition, in order for us to understand which worker are more likely to participate in replacement or additional work from home, we estimate multi-level logit models that predict the likelihood that a person's working from home status fell into a given category of replacement working from home or additional working from home relative to the reference category of not working from home. So next slide. So here is results. So firstly, we find that people who work from home work significantly longer hours and longer overtime hours than those people who do not work from home. And it is especially evidence among those people who are doing additional work from home. So for example, on average, for those people doing additional work from home, they work on average about 3.1 hours more overtime than those people who do not work from home. So in comparison, the replacement work from home only increase overtime hours by about 1.27 hours as compared to workers who do not work from home. And the coefficients for replacement and additional work from home are also significantly different from each other. Next slide. So this table shows the relationship between both forms of working from home and people's well-being outcomes and turnover intentions in models that controls for people's total working hours, as well as people's other work and personal characteristics. So firstly, in the first two columns, we find that for those people who engage in additional work from home, report a much greater work to family conflict and family to work conflict compared to those people who do not work from home. So in comparison, for those people who only work from home during regular hours, we do not find a significant difference between the work to family and family to work conflict compared to people who do not work from home. So this is an especially important finding, since a major concern has been that bring work home could increase people's work and family challenges and conflict. But what this model shows is that that is only the case when the home-based work is performed outside of regular or contractual working hours. And secondly, what this table shows is that working from home is not associated with higher job satisfaction, but compared to workers who do not work from home, we find that replacement work from home predict significantly higher psychological well-being and the work engagement as compared to those who do not work from home. And in contrast, for those people who work from home outside of regular hours, do not report better well-being than those people who work only in their workplaces, and they see more moderate improvement in engagement. And lastly, we find that for those people who work from home during outside or of regular hours, are also significantly more likely to be considering leaving their job than those people who do not work from home at all. And work from home during regular hours does not increase the risk of planning to leave someone's job. So here in this table, we summarize the results from the multinomial logic model predicting who is more likely to work from home. So as expected, we find that women and workers with childcare responsibilities are more likely to work from home within the normal hours, but not outside of the normal hours. And workers' educational level and their wage level predict both type of working from home practices. So turning to the firm level characteristics, we find that firms' adoption of trust-based working time policies, which is a practice that allows people to determine their own working schedule, is only associated with replacement working from home, but not associated with additional working from home. And also, as expected, the managerial support of flexible working is associated with both type of working from home, and the effect is even stronger for the former type. And lastly, I think that's the most surprising results for us, because originally we expect that the worker voice channels, such as works council and the collective bargaining arrangement, could associate with replacement work from home. But we do not find evidence that either form of this voice channel are associated with work from home. So we welcome your thoughts and comments on why this is the case in Germany, which is a country with strong tradition of co-determination. So yeah, so to summarize, in this work, what we do is that we try to reconcile the two seemingly contradictory views of working from home as a tool for worker empowerment or as a tool for work intensification. So we find that additional work from home is actually problematic because it is associated with more working hours, more work to family conflict, family to work conflict, as well as higher turnover intentions. Well, the replacement working from home brings a lot of benefits, such as workers' greater engagement and greater worker well-being. Next slide. So the implication of this research is that, so there has been a lot of critiques of working from home as intensifying, but we find that this is mostly true only for the high status workers. So we think that we can do work from home in a way that it benefits workers, but that practice requires us to explicitly set it up as replacement for time on site, rather than as a strategy to deal with high workload. Okay, thank you very much. We welcome your feedback and question after the next presentation.
Great. Great, thank you. And I'll just share my screen to get to the next. Um, oops. I'm sorry, just a minute. Do you see that one now or not?
I'm not seeing a share screen right now. Oh, there we go. Yes.
There we go. Okay. Thank you, Duanyi. Karen, why don't you go ahead then?
All right, thank you. That's me. So today I will talk about research that I'm collaborate with Teresa, Cardador, Eunmi, and Sunjin, Sanghoon, and Sunjin. It's a long journey that also funding by the university. We looked at the effect of paternity leave on wives' return to work and couple life satisfaction. And it's multi-country and longitudinal analysis. Next. All right. So first, I'll summarize the critical point of the paper. It's very complex paper. So we first draw a picture of the rate of and the duration of paternity leave that used in Australia, Germany, and South Korea. There is some discussion in the literature of the usage of paternity leave. And so in order to kind of capture the bigger picture, we also wanted first to see who take in those countries paternity leave. Then we compared the effect of paternity leaves on mothers returned to work and both on mothers and fathers' life satisfaction. We use representative data from the 3 countries, and we also chose those countries because they manifest different welfare policy regime and gender ideology and norms, and of course the policy itself. Then within each country, we use a longitudinal analysis that take into account the dyadic level, both partner decisions. As I said, those effects of paternity leave on parents' outcomes show some similarities and some differences between the 3 countries. Okay, next. Some background about this paper. Paternity leave can increase interest as a policy that may benefit not only fathers, but also children and mothers. We studied the effect of paternity leave on both parents' well-being, which is the subjective life satisfaction, and on the probability for mother to return to work. We chose 3 different culture contexts, which represent different policy regime and gender ideology, norms, values, or in between those 3 countries, Australia, Germany, and South Korea. Next. So to begin with, this table kind of show the variation in the policy in those 3 countries, and 2 main things to take into account. One is the duration of paid leave that each partner can take. And also in the paper, we discuss a little bit the idea that some countries like Germany has also the policy, it's structure within the policy that it's use it or leave it. So one partner can take it or they lose it. And the other thing is the replacement rate that also affect the usage of the policy. We can see that some countries give only up to minimum wage or up to 67% of the replacement rate, where South Korea, for example, give full payment for mothers, and for fathers they have 3 days full payment for these studies, up to these studies. Also, there is some changes over time within the policy, and we align the policy with the data, so we can kind of take a picture of the data that's reliable to the policy that we kind of account for. Next. Then, I think in terms of, we have only 12 minutes, so I put here only the empirical model to show what we kind of hypothesize about the research. And then in the paper or in the discussion, we can discuss a little bit more on the results on the model within each countries. But what is important here that you see that the model, if you look at the arrows, the thick arrow, the blue arrows, we kind of look at when the father paid, how much, the duration of father take leave, how it affect the direct effect of return to work and mother life satisfaction and himself satisfaction, life satisfaction, and then the indirect effect to those, whether the mother returned to work or not, whether her life satisfaction to his life satisfaction. So this is the indirect effect. Next. So those are the general hypotheses that we test in the research. Paternity leave duration will positively associated with the probability mother will return to work within a year of giving birth. Paternity leave duration will be positively associated with mother's life satisfaction, and paternity leave duration will be positively associated with father's life satisfaction directly and through mother's life satisfaction and return to work indirect. Next. One of the criteria to be able to use to do this analysis, we needed a dyadic level variable in the data, and we also wanted to have it longitudinal, and we also wanted to have it representative of the population. And so it's this is above and beyond the other reason why we choose the data from Australia, Germany, and South Korea. Next, please. The analysis that we do, we cross-legged actor-partner interaction model, which kind of take into account, as I already mentioned, the dyadic level. And it's a SEM, SEM model to take those into account. And then longitudinal as well. Next. Okay, so the results. Paternity leave was used by almost 60%, 59% in Australia, only 6%, and I can discuss that a little bit more in the discussion if that would allow to me some explanation for that, and 23% in Korea. So we see that some variation in the usage of the paternity leave. The average length of paternity leave among users was 11 days in Australia, 199 days in Germany, and 3 days in Korea. And 57 of Australian mothers and 68 of German mothers and 56 of Korean mothers returned to work within the 12 months after giving birth. Next, please. So what the results that we found? We found that paternity leave duration was in Taiwan was positively associated with mother's return to work in Australia and in Germany, but not in Korea. We also found that paternity leave duration was positively associated with mother life satisfaction in all countries, very consistent. We also found that paternity leave duration was negatively associated to life satisfaction. In Australia, it was unrelated, not significant to life satisfaction in Germany, and positive related to life satisfaction in Korea. Mother's return to work was positively associated with life satisfaction only in Australia. And mother's life satisfaction was positively associated with father's life satisfaction in time 3 in all countries. Now, some colleagues told me that that will be a sensation in the media, those two kind of result that paternity leave duration is positively associated with mother life satisfaction in all countries, and mother's life satisfaction indirect affected positive positive affected to life satisfaction in time 3 in all countries. It's kind of sounds like happy wife, happy life. And but in the paper, we kind of try to argue differently and give some gender equality in the labor market and family might explain, and we kind of give different explanation to those results. And that's not me. Next. Paternity leave duration was positively associated with mother return. I think we already said that, so yeah. So summary, some indication that providing longer leave yields to higher probability that mother will return to work. Mother's well-being increase when father take longer paternity leave, and also in the indirect effect that father's well-being indirectly affect from mother life satisfaction. And one thing to note that the Germans father who take leave are probably are the main provider. We don't know that for certain, but we can see that only 6% take leave, and they take on average 199 days of leave. And the last slide, please. It also seems that encouraging father to take any paternity leave, it's still a largest challenges. The Australian policy of leave that kind of give 2 weeks and can taken within the first year of a child seems to incentivize more father to take. Almost 59% of the father takes use the policy. And then also we can see that a key might be a higher replacement rate. In Korea, a country that rank very low in gender egalitarianism, 1 in 4 fathers take leave and they take the full paid extent, 3 days. That's in my data, but they increase the amount of days that they give now to 10 days. And Korea, it's also the country that offer full replacement. And overall paternity leave has a positive impact on return of mothers to work and the well-being of families. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we have some questions for these excellent presentations. I'm just looking at some of the questions that have come in. And people can also use the raise hand function. So Ting Ting, you had a question for everyone. Can you be unmuted and ask that question perhaps openly?
Oh, thank you, Peter. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes. Good.
Okay, thanks. So this is a question for the second presentation from Duanyi and her colleagues. I think I recall that your data is focusing on manufacturing service sectors. So I think that probably explains why, collective bargaining does not have any impact on your results. Because that really kind of my question is what type of employees can work from home in your particular setting? Yeah, I recognize you mentioned that those high status employees, but exactly what type of job? Do you have any kind of insight on that? Thank you.
Yeah, sure. So I think I can answer that question directly. So Peter, I don't know whether that's easy for you to pull my slides, because in the appendix, I show the full table of the multinomial model on page 19, I believe. Next slide.
This one?
Next one. Wait. Oh, yeah, this one. So I think that's, yeah, so this is slightly blurred, but so this is a full model predicting who can work from home. So the way we model the worker voice channel is I set it up as a categorical variable, which equals 0 if the organization have no works council or no collective bargaining agreement. 1 if it only has works council, 2 if it is only covered by collective bargaining agreement, and 3 if both. So here I do not find significant evidence that suggests that either type of those worker voice channels are associated with either type of working from home practices. I think that's why I say it's surprising to me. I think one reason, as you mentioned, is that probably the coverage rate of works council and collective bargaining agreement is slightly too high for this group of workers. So in the descriptive statistics, I find that around 80% of people are covered by works council and 80-something% are covered by collective bargaining agreement. So maybe there are some power issues going on here. So I have to investigate more here. Does that answer your question? And also this table shows the characteristics of people who are more likely to work from home.
Yeah,
Yes, thank you.
I wanted to just add, this seemed like really interesting finding too. I mean, some of this, I also find interesting that you don't have an effect on establishment size either, it looks like from this table. That size doesn't seem to matter, nor the works council or the collective agreement. And so I don't know if it is a power issue or if it's also that this is more of an individual issue. Where is work from home part of a right to request, where there's really, these are individual bargains that are being done between employees and their managers. And so you see this effect of managerial support as being particularly critical. And that was something we would expect, that supervisor support would really do this, and that it's really working from home as a practice of replacement hours is something that's an individual bargain, not a collective kind of issue. That's just doing the framing. So that was kind of some thoughts that I had on that.
Yeah, so I have a question for you, Peter. Do you know whether that practice is covered by the collective bargaining agreement in Germany?
I think what would a collective agreement would provide the framework to say an employee can request a schedule from a manager, but it wouldn't dictate necessarily a right to work at home specifically. It would probably be something that would be a broad framework agreement. And then the question, though, is whether Works Council would be advocating for individual employees. So where there wasn't a Works Council present, you would say, well, they don't have this ability to go to a Works Council and say, look, I've requested to work at home. It's not working. I need your help. I need the Works Council to intervene. You're not showing that effect. You're not showing that that Works Council is playing that advocacy role, which is surprising, but it also lends itself, it also gets to this idea of managerial support, that the employee is really seeing that the ones that are actually working from home are finding that it's the managerial support, not the employee voice mechanism that's really making the difference on their ability to work from home. So they either don't utilize the Works Council or the Works Council isn't in tune with it. And so, yeah, that's what I'd say.
Okay, thank you, Peter.
Yeah. I think Amit had raised his hand, I thought, too. Amit, did you want to ask a question?
Yes, thank you, Peter. I want to ask also Duanyi, do you know if they got training on how to work from home? Because I assume people who do replacement work from home are more likely to get training compared to people who are just doing an extra work working from home, and that might also relate to their perceptions of working from home.
Yeah, that's a good question, but that is not measured in our current study about whether they got training or not. But I think that's a good point for us to investigate in the future. Do you have more things to add on that, Erin?
Oh, I'm sorry. No, I don't. I think it's a good point. We don't know the structure of how it's negotiated exactly, and we don't know the structure of what supports are provided by the organization, including training. That does remind me, though, that it may be worthwhile to think about, we've talked about doing an analysis of prevalence in the firm and prevalence in the industry, kind of trying to get at, is this set up as something that's kind of standardized as a practice or just as an response to overload and high demands?
I would just add a quick thing there too about the additional of replacement versus additional. Whereas I think of a replacement work at home as a renegotiation of one's work, that I'm now going to work in a different location, which may require different specifications of performance requirements or other things, versus additional hours. It's really like self-selecting into overtime work. I'm now at home and I'm going to take on additional hours. And so I worry a little bit that additional work at home is almost by definition additional hours, some kind of intensification rather than sort of a specific work at home arrangement. And so that ability to understand how these things might be different would be helpful. And maybe the data, the way the questions asked might help in that regard. But that was something I thought of too. Erin, you had a question, and you can either answer my comment or ask your question, Erin, if you want to.
I think we'll move on. Thank you all for those questions. I'll ask, this was for Karen. I was just a little bit confused. I mean, fascinating project, super exciting. I was a little unclear about whether the focal independent variable was duration among users, which was my assumption, but then you shared that there was also, you know, many men who did not use at all. And then a secondary question was just wondering if it is duration and the variation is 1 to 3 days, basically, why do you think that would have any positive effects? The story in Germany and Australia makes a little bit more intuitive sense to me.
Right, so thank you. I'll try to answer in short for all those questions. So about the comparison, yes, we do kind of compare between fathers who take to the fathers who did not take. And it is important to see that the policy incentivize different subpopulation within the countries. And so it allowed and incentivized different fathers, and might be also, that might be an issue of self-selection, might be that mothers also who want to return to work, might be that the father also more likely to take and use those policies. We address that in the paper a lot. And the other question is, because of the differences in the policy and the regime and culture and norms, we see that there are variation in the policy itself that allowed fathers to take a different amount of time paid leave. And the question, so 3 days, for example, in Korea, is that really something that can affect life satisfaction for fathers, for mothers, and then in the long term for fathers? And so I only will say one thing about that. We also address that in the paper, but one thing that to keep in mind is that it's not only the 3 days that they take, but the emotional support. And I think this is a very critical time when mothers give birth. And we all remember this time. So those, whether or not fathers are there to support, it's a huge, memorable time. And so I think the effect, not necessarily it's whether or not they really take care of the kids, or whether or not they're really involved.
Great, thank you. Allison, you had a comment in the chat. I wanted to give you a chance to ask that question if you'd like.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, I think it's exactly what you were just saying. My question was around time use, and just wondering if we know, or if we think we know, what dads might be doing with that time, because work from Sullivan, Gosheni, Robinson, 2018 kind of looks at that balance between the two. And I'm thinking also about the way in which academics use the sabbatical, male-female differences, that it can lead to men doing more writing and women not. And also linking to kind of Danny Kahneman's work on happiness, that having children makes people happier, but looking after them ranks somewhere between loading the dishwasher and vacuuming. So it's about what kind of work are they doing, and is it the primary kind of bathing, feeding, or is it actually changing longer term, the kind of the roles over time? And if it were the second, then it might lead to more gender equal caregiving over the life course. So just sort of wondering if in the future, it might be possible to link that to some of the work on time use.
Karen, did you have a comment on that?
I just will say that I'm running now an analysis about time use in Korea and time use in the United States, not in those countries. So I cannot compare to those countries that in this paper, but this is a different paper. And also in this paper, we kind of have some data from previous papers about the amount of time that fathers spend with children from time use, and the amount of times that mothers use with children, and even when they return to work, how that changed. And so we see that obviously there is a huge gap between this one. And the mechanism behind what brings life satisfaction and what makes mothers to return to work while father taking leave. We need to investigate it more. We are now collecting more qualitative in interviews, couple, dyadic level, both partners, to see the mechanism. But in this these three data sets, we're really pleased that we have the dyadic level, and we have it representative, and we have it over time. And so we couldn't address those questions, of course.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone. I mean, we've reached the end of our time, as short as these sessions are, and I want to thank everyone for their participation and the paper presenters and everyone else. So thank you, and have a good day.